Everyone, welcome back to Teaching the Bible. I'm your host, Michael Koch. Teaching the Bible is a weekly television series that teaches all of the main events and points of the Bible. It moves from the beginning in the book of Genesis, and week by week we cover all the main events and teachings in the Bible till eventually get to the end of the Bible in the book of Revelation. Let me quickly go over what we taught so far, the main events, and where we're going to start with today. Started with creation, where God created everything. Then we had Adam and Eve. Then we had Cain and Abel. Then the next main event was Noah and the ark. Then the Tower of Babel. Then Abraham, Isaac, Jacob's 12 sons, and one son in particular, Joseph. Now we pick up today with the next main event in the Bible, which is the events of Moses and the Israelites. Now, there's several things that happen with Moses and Israelites, but the first two that we're going to cover one today, and we're going to cover one next week. Moses was around for a while, did a lot of things in the Bible. Today, we're going to learn about how Jacob's 12 sons, who sold Joseph into slavery, Joseph, through a series of events with God, rose to second in command of Egypt, had this plan to save from God, to save everybody from famine that was coming, which he did. Joseph's 11 brothers, Joseph confronted them, forgave them, and Joseph's 11 brothers, along with their father Jacob, moved to Egypt to be with Joseph because he was second in charge there, but also that was the only place in the area that had food because Joseph's plan from God saved everybody from the famine. Nowhere else had food. So Jacob and his 12 sons lived the rest of their lives in Egypt with Joseph, and they passed away there. But while they were there, they had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, so on. Became many people called Israelites after Israel, who was Jacob. God changed Jacob's name to Israel. So his offspring were the Israelites. They were also called by the Egyptians the Hebrews. They had two names by the Egyptians, the Israelites and the Hebrews. So they reproduced and they became a great many people in Egypt. And we're going to hear what happens next. So as time passed, by the way, we're in the book of Exodus now. We moved out of the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis started with God created everything, and it ended with Joseph, with the last main event. But again, the author of everything in the Bible is God. Although it was written by men, Holy Spirit came through men and had them write exactly what God wanted, or God would speak to them face to face, like he does with Moses, and he tells them face to face, this is what I want you to write. So everything in the Bible is the word of God. It was written by man. Man is not the author. God's the author. So we moved out of Genesis. Now we're starting a second book called Exodus. So as time passed, Jacob, or Israel's 12 sons, had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and so on while they're living in Egypt. Because of Joseph's wise plan given to him by God on what to do during the famine, Egypt was the only country in the area that had food. Now the descendants of Jacob's 12 sons became a great many people in Egypt called the Israelites, or the Hebrews. Now over time, a new Pharaoh became in charge of Egypt. Several years after Joseph, there was a new Pharaoh, and he never heard of Joseph. And he became very concerned and worried about these Israelites in this country. And his thinking was, who are these people in our country? They're not Egyptians. They're called the Israelites or Hebrews. Who are they? Why are they here? And they said, well, Joseph brought them as his family. I don't know this Joseph, because Joseph was a long time ago. These people aren't Egyptians. And since they're not Egyptians, how do we know that if somebody attacks us, a foreign country, that they won't side with them and try to overthrow us? We need to do something about these people in our country called the Israelites, the Hebrews, that aren't Egyptians. So out of fear and concern, Pharaoh instructed the commanders beneath him to turn the Israelites into slaves and told them to treat them harshly. Now, as slaves, the Israelites helped build cities for Pharaoh. But the more the Pharaoh oppressed the Israelites, however, the more they multiplied. Christians today know that, especially to this audience that I'm talking to. The more that those that follow God as Christians seem to get persecuted and oppressed, the more they seem to flourish. The Pharaoh then instructed the midwives that delivered babies that if an Israelite or a Hebrew woman gave birth to a boy, the midwives were instructed to kill the baby boy. But if it was a girl, they could let it live. And this was done by Pharaoh to reduce the number of these Israelites living in his country of Egypt. The midwives refused to do this, however, and God blessed the midwives for refusing. Then Pharaoh gave a new order. He said, every boy that was born of a Hebrew woman is to be thrown into the Nile River to drown, but every girl that is born, she may be allowed to live. And you could read that in Exodus chapter 1, verses 1 to 22. The birth of Moses. So one day, a Hebrew or an Israelite woman gave birth to a boy in Egypt. One of the slave Hebrews in Egypt gave birth to a boy. Now she hid him for 3 months so that the authorities would not get him and drown him in the Nile River. But as he got bigger, she couldn't hide him well anymore. He's crying and everything, and she just couldn't hide him anymore. So out of desperation, she didn't know what to do because she was afraid that they would just drown him in the river. She took her 3-month-old baby boy, put him in a basket, put him on the edge of the river, and sent her daughter, which is the baby's older sister, to spy on it through the bushes and just praying to God, please, something good happen to my baby, because if it stays here any longer, it's going to get confiscated and thrown into the river. So please, God, I'm giving it basically in your hands. I'm leaving it there, and I hope something good happens to my boy. Well, as the baby's sister hid and watched to see what happened, the Pharaoh's own daughter came down to bathe in the Nile River. Now she found the basket with this baby inside. Now even though it was a Hebrew baby, she felt sorry for it, and she took it and she adopted it as her own son. When the baby's sister was hiding, saw what was going on, she came out and approached Pharaoh's daughter and said, Shall I go and call a nurse Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse this child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter said, Go do that. You read that in Exodus chapter 2, verses 7 to 8. So the baby's sister went and got their actual Hebrew mother and brought her to Pharaoh's daughter, the actual mother that gave birth to this boy. Pharaoh's daughter told the baby's mother that she would pay her to nurse him. The baby was nursed by his own Hebrew mother in the house of Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh's daughter named the boy Moses, and the name Moses means, I drew him out of the water. You can read that in Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 to 10. Now over time, Moses grew into a man. One day Moses saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, one of his own people. Out of anger and rage, Moses killed this Egyptian. Then he hid the Egyptian in the sand. Well, somebody saw him, and the word of this got back to Pharaoh. Pharaoh wanted to kill Moses because of this. Moses heard that Pharaoh wanted to kill him because he killed this Egyptian, so Moses ran out of the country for fear of his life. And he went to a land called Midian. Now Moses found a wife in Midian, and her name was Zipporah, and they had a son. They named him Gershom. Now Moses lived in Midian for 40 years, and that's in Exodus chapter 2, verse 11 to 22. So you see, when God comes to Moses and says, I want you to free my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt, he's 80. When he fled to Midian for his life, he's 40. So from birth to 40, Moses grew up in Egypt as the Pharaoh's adopted grandson. From 40 to 80, Moses hid from Pharaoh out of fear of his life in this land called Midian. God hears Israel's groaning. Now the people of Israel groaned for many years because of their slavery in Egypt, and they cried out to God for help. God heard their groaning and their cries. He remembered his promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he would make their descendants as numerous as the grains of sand on the seashore, and God decided to help. Now at the time, Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro in the land of Midian. God appeared to Moses in the form of a bush that was burning, yet it wasn't consumed. So Moses went up to see what's up with this bush. It's on fire, but it's not getting burned up. And when Moses went to investigate, that's when God spoke to Moses. God told Moses that he saw the affliction of his people in Egypt, and he heard their cry due to the suffering from their Egyptian slave masters. God said that he would send Moses to Pharaoh of Egypt to bring the Hebrews out of Egypt and into a land flowing with milk and honey that God was setting aside for them. Now Moses was afraid to do this. Don't forget, Moses has been hiding for the last 40 years from Pharaoh because Pharaoh wanted to put him to death for him killing an Egyptian. Now God's saying, I want you to go back to Pharaoh and I want you to free these people that are slaves. He was very afraid to do this, and he tried to talk his way out of it out of fear. Now, when God saw he was afraid, God said that he would strengthen Moses and give him whatever power he needed to bring the Hebrews out of slavery in Egypt and into a new promised land. And God said that in Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 to 22, and in Exodus chapter 4, verses 1 to 17. Well, then Moses asked God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers sent me to you, and they ask me, well, what's this God's name? What am I to say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. So that's in Exodus chapter 3, verses 13 to 14. Now, it's important. So God says to Moses, tell the people my name is I am. Okay? Much in the future, in the New Testament, Jesus is arguing with the religious leaders that are trying to put him to death. And Jesus made a statement that, Moses was happy to see the day of Jesus. And they said, how can you have seen Moses? You're only 33 years old. He was, thousands of years ago, whatever. And Jesus said, before Moses was, I am. By saying I am, he was saying he was God, because that's the name that God told Moses his name was. And the religious leaders used that to condemn Jesus to death. They said, you're being condemned to death for one of the reasons was for blasphemy, for saying you're God. Well, Jesus is God. It wasn't blasphemy. But this statement will come up later with Jesus when God says, tell them, I am who I am has sent me to you. Now, Moses was afraid that the Israelites in Egypt wouldn't believe that God sent him to free them. So God gave Moses the ability to do miracles in front of the Israelites to prove that God sent him. Then Moses trying to get out of this, he's afraid. Then Moses said to God, listen, I don't speak well. I speak very poorly. I can't go to and speak on your behalf and it's thought that he might have had some kind of speech impediment or something. Well, God reminded Moses that it was God that made everyone's mouth and gave them the ability to speak. And he said he will surely give Moses the ability to speak powerfully when the time comes. He also said, Moses, if it'll make you feel better, you could take your brother Aaron with you to do this. Aaron was a Levite, and he spoke very well. God told Moses that he would be with both of them when they spoke. So eventually Moses agreed and said, okay, God, I will do what you're asking me to do. You can find that in Exodus chapter 4, verses 1 to 17. Moses returned to Egypt with his family. Took his whole family back to Egypt. Remember, he's been hiding out for the last 40 years from Egypt. Moses went to Pharaoh and told him that God said that Pharaoh needs to let the Israelites go for 3 days to worship God in the wilderness. Pharaoh became angry at Moses, and he said, who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go. That's in Exodus chapter 5, verses 2. Pharaoh then said, not only would he not let the Israelites go to worship God, but he would give the Israelites much harder work to do because they have so much free time on their hands that, they're able to take off work and go worship in the wilderness for 3 days. So Pharaoh gave the order. Up to this point, the Israelites are building buildings for Pharaoh out of bricks. Bricks they made with straw, and I guess they mixed with mud or other things and became hardened bricks. Now, up to this point, the system they had was the slave masters would bring straw to the Israelites, and the Israelites then would use the straw to make the bricks that they needed. Pharaoh said, because you have so much free time in your hands to go worship this God of yours in the wilderness, you mustn't be working to your full capacity. So he gave an order that the Israelites now had to go find all of their own straw. The slave masters weren't allowed to bring them any straw. They had to find their own straw to make the bricks, yet they had to make as many bricks now as they did before when the slave masters brought them all their straw. Well, the people freaked out, and they went to Moses and said, what did you do to us? You came and told Pharaoh, God said, let us go, and now Pharaoh gave us, we have to go find our own straw, yet we have to make as many bricks as before when they gave us straw, or he's going to punish us. We can't do that. What did you do to us? And then Pharaoh went to God and said, God, what did you do? Why did you send me and tell me to do this? And now Pharaoh is so much harder on them. God said to Moses, Moses, now you're going to see what I'm going to do to Pharaoh for him being harsh to the Israelites. He told Moses to tell the Israelites that God would indeed free them from being slaves to the Egyptians, and he would give them their own land, and he would be their God. God said that in Exodus chapter 5, verses 1 to 23, and 6, verse 1 to 8. Now Moses was 80 years old, and his brother was 83 when they spoke with Pharaoh. God then appeared to Moses, and You'll see soon. God's still speaking to certain people face to face. At one point, possibly in the next or 2 teachings from now, we're going to see how the people went to God and said, please don't appear to us and speak to us face to face. You're so awesome and scary because you're so awesome. We're afraid we're going to have a heart attack and die. Please tell the person and send the message. And that's where the prophets came from. Okay? Because God said, okay, I'll do that. But right now, he's still speaking to Moses, at least face to face. So God appeared to Moses and said, see, I have made you like God to Pharaoh. And your brother Aaron, he shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you. And your brother Aaron shall tell Pharaoh to let the people go out of his land. And God said that in Exodus chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. So Moses went with his brother Aaron back to Pharaoh and said, God said, let my people go. Pharaoh refused to do this. Moses threw a staff he had in his hand on the ground and it became a snake. Pharaoh's magicians, though, were able to do the same thing. They threw something on the ground. They became snakes. But Moses' snake attacked and ate all the magician snakes. Now the Pharaoh was surprised at this, but he still would not let the Israelites go. Moses said to Pharaoh that he would come back again and demand in the name of God that Pharaoh let the Israelites go. Each time the Pharaoh said no, Moses warned him that God would send a plague on the Egyptians, and eventually you're going to let them go because you're not going to be able to take the plagues anymore. So Moses came back to Pharaoh, said, let my people go, says God. Pharaoh says no. The first time God and Moses turned the water of the Nile River into blood. All the fish died and the river stank. Now, the Pharaoh's magicians were also able to do this with their secret arts. Second time Pharaoh refused to let the Israelites go, God and Moses sent a plague of frogs in Egypt. Frogs got into the people's houses, were everywhere in Egypt, but they left the Israelites alone. Now the Pharaoh's magicians were also able to do this too. Now the third time that Pharaoh said no, when Moses said, God said, let my people go, God and Moses sent a plague of gnats or little flies all over the Egyptians. Now from this point on, the Pharaoh's magicians could not do any of the plagues or miracles that God did. They were able to do the first 2, but they could not do these other 8 or anything after. So the fourth time Pharaoh said no, God had Moses send a plague of flies on the Egyptians, but not the Israelites. The fifth time Pharaoh said no, all the livestock the Egyptians died, such as their cows, horses, and cattle, and camels. But the livestock the Israelites were fine. They were untouched. Sixth time Pharaoh said no, God sent a plague of boils and sores on the skin of just the Egyptian people. And the magicians had boils and sores on them. They were so painful they couldn't even stand in the presence of Moses. They ran and hid because the ones who did the first 2 miracles were now in so much pain from the plague that they were completely useless. The seventh time the Pharaoh said no, God had Moses send huge hail on Egypt, and it killed any person or animal that was outside. The eighth time Pharaoh said no, he wouldn't let them go. God and Moses sent a plague of locusts or grasshoppers. They were all over the Egyptians, but they left the Israelites alone. The ninth time Pharaoh said no, God and Moses sent 3 days of complete darkness over Egypt. They said it was so dark it was painful. You couldn't see anything. But the Israelites had lights in their home during this plague from God. Now, with each time God sent a plague through Moses, Pharaoh would come to Moses and say, I've sinned against your God. Please, I'll let the Israelites go if you ask your God to stop this plague. If he stops this plague, I'll let them go. Each time Moses would go to God and say, please stop the plague, and God would stop the plague. But after each time, Pharaoh's heart would become hardened, it says, and he would change his mind and say, I will not let the Israelites go. That's in Exodus chapter 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now, it says in the Bible clearly that God was the one that hardened Pharaoh's heart each time to make it so he would say, no, I changed my mind, I won't let the Israelites go. Why would God do that? If God is trying to get the Israelites out and Pharaoh agrees to it, why would God change his heart and harden it so that he would say, you know what, I'm not letting them go? I'm not sure, it doesn't say in the Bible, but I can have a good guess. Because each time Pharaoh said no, it would cause God to do another plague that Moses asked him to do. And the Israelites saw this. This allowed the Israelites to witness 10 plagues that Moses asked for and God did, and then Moses said stop and God would stop, to show clearly he is God. He is God. And there's other ones. You'll see there's 4 others after the plagues, and the Israelites saw all these. And 2 big reasons. They would know first he was God and he could do this. Second, you'll see next week how quickly the Israelites, after seeing God, and we're going to count up, do 14 spectacular miracles in front of them. Right after that, how quickly they turn away from him and walk away from God and make a golden calf to worship. And you'll see the Israelites do this again and again and again, that very quickly they turn around and walk away from God. Why is that important? Again, the reason why all this in the Bible, first of all, it's true stories, but what can we learn from it? What can we take from it? We're supposed to learn. We're supposed to read the Bible so we can learn from it. How often do we turn away from God? How often when God does something good, oh, God, I love you, and as soon as things get bad, we turn away. Or when things are going good, we think we don't need him. Point is, it shows us, the Israelites show us, how easy it is for man to walk away from God and the consequences that happens. And when people follow God, the benefits they get. Okay, so we're supposed to learn from this. Next is the Passover. The final plague, the 10th plague, was the worst one. God had Moses tell Pharaoh that if he did not let the Israelites go, God would kill the firstborn child and animal of everyone in Egypt. The Pharaoh said he would not let the Israelites go. Did God cause him to harden his heart? I think so. It says God kept doing this. So God said no, or Pharaoh said no, I won't let them go. God told each Israelite family to kill a lamb and paint a stripe of its blood across the doorway of each house of each Israelite house. This way, God would know which houses are those of Israelites, and he would pass over their house with his judgment of death and not kill the firstborn person or animal in that house. At midnight, God killed the firstborn of every animal and family that did not have the lamb's blood over the doorpost, including the Pharaoh's son. So the Pharaoh's firstborn son died due to the judgment of death by God. And there was a great cry in Egypt. There was not a house where someone was not dead. That's in Exodus chapter 12, verses 30. But the Israelites had lamb's blood over all their doorposts. So their firstborn children and animals were spared. The Egyptians were so upset that the Pharaoh said to the Israelites, get out of here, leave. You want to leave? Go. Please leave. We don't want you here. You make us sick. My son's dead. All these people have dead children and animals in their house. Get out of here and don't come back. You turn my stomach. And he gave them gold and stuff just to get them out of here. Now, Passover is very important because it's a foreshadowing of what's going to happen with Jesus. So with the Israelites, God's people, which is we follow Jesus, now we are God's people. If they took the blood of a lamb that was slain and put it over the doorpost, the judgment of God of death would pass over. That's what we call Passover. Would pass over them and not touch them. Okay? Jesus is the Lamb of God. He shed his blood to pay for all of our sins. He was the firstborn son that was put to death. He's God's firstborn son and his only son. Don't forget, Egypt, everybody lost their firstborn child. Firstborn son of God was put to death, the Lamb of God. And if you trust in him and the blood he shed from you, God's judgment will pass over you when you die. And you will not be condemned to death, but you'll be accepted into heaven. So, what happened with the Israelites in the Passover is a foreshadowing of what Jesus is going to do for us. The Exodus and the parting of the Red Sea. So a few days after the Israelites left Egypt, Pharaoh changed his mind about allowing them to leave. Again, God hardened his heart. He was so disgusted at them. Get out of here. Now he said, what did I do? I left all these slaves go. Free labor. I want them back. God was doing this to him so the Israelites could see what God will do. Pharaoh gathered his army and chased after the Israelites, intending to capture them once again and turn them into slaves once more in Egypt. The Egyptian army surrounded the Israelites on all sides, and they're backward to the Red Sea, so they're trapped. Okay? God told Moses to raise his arms in the air. When he did, the Red Sea parted, and the Israelites crossed over on the dry sea floor between two huge walls of water in the parted Red Sea. Now, when the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, the Egyptians eventually decided to follow them across this dry sea floor with these huge walls of water. Now, when the Israelites all got over safely and the Egyptians were behind them, now all the army was in this dry sea floor following them, God told Moses to raise his arms in the air again. And when he did, the walls of the water of the Red Sea came crashing down on the Egyptian army, and it drowned the entire army that was following the Israelites. Finally, God saved the Israelites from being slaves of the Egyptians, and he moved them out of Egypt after being slaves there for 430 years. That's in Exodus chapter 12, verses 33 to 42, and Exodus chapter 14, verses 1 and 31. God prophesied this to Abraham. When, God said to Abraham, if you follow me, I'll make your descendants a great nation. But I want to let you know something, Abraham, that several years from now, your descendants will become slaves in a foreign land, and they'll be slaves there for 400 years, but I will eventually release them and free them. And that's what he did. So now God did 11 miracles in front of the Israelites. The 10 plagues and the parting and crushing down of the Red Sea. After being saved by the Egyptian army, Moses and the Israelites were walking outside of Egypt, waiting for God to show them where God was going to have them live. They got hungry, so God rained down bread from heaven each day like snowflakes. It was called manna, and the people gathered up each day to eat it. Miracle number 11, God raining food down from heaven every day, every morning. People asked for meat to eat, so then God caused quail to fly in their camp every night and land there, and the people would capture it and cook it and eat it. Miracle 12. When the people got thirsty, God had Moses take this stick that he had in his hand, walk up to a big rock. Oh, you're thirsty? Okay. Hit a rock and water would come gushing out, drinking water forever. Miracle 14. So, the Israelites to see him do 10 plagues, start and stop 10 plagues on the Egyptians, nothing touch Israelites, parting of the Red Sea, and those are all kind of judgment things. And then provision. I'll feed you every day with manna. I'll feed you every day with miracles. These are miracles with quail and with water coming out of a rock that he hit. You could read that in Exodus chapter 16 and 17. We're finished today. Where we're going to pick up next week is God giving Moses and the Israelites and us the 10 Commandments. And we're going to see how quickly the Israelites rebel against God as soon as something doesn't go the way they think it should. And again, why is that important to know?